Hey Kipsters, today we're going to be working on lesson 20. Every line is a graph of a linear equation. Take 10 seconds to make sure your paper says lesson 20. Every line is a graph of a linear equation. And let's get started. Our objective today is going to be that students will be able to write the linear equation whose graph is a line. In other words, we're going to kind of reverse what we've been doing in the previous lessons. We are going to be given a line. We are going to need to write the equation that represents that line, and then we're going to transform that equation with properties of equality back into standard form. Very similar to the reversal process that we did for transformations in Module 2. To prove that a transformation produced a congruent figure, you should be able to translate it left and then translate it back, which will be the opposite direction, so right, and the object would not be moved. Let's recap some things from previous lessons. So from previous lessons, we talked about slope, and we talked about, we talked about standard form, and we talked about slope-intercept form. So standard form of a linear equation is ax plus by equals c. Remember, in this equation, a, b, and c are all constants, they're all numbers. We then used properties of equality to isolate the variable y. We transform standard form equations into slope-intercept form. We do this because slope-intercept form is easier to graph. Remember that slope is m and y-intercept is b. Some things to remember about slope. Remember, slope is our rate of change, or the distance between 2 points on the line. Something I've noticed from previous lessons is you're picking points that are not on the line. Okay, remember slope. To calculate slope, you need 2 points on the line. Remember that slope can be positive, so that's left to right inclining, or slope can be negative, and that's left to right declining. Last bit of recap information is y-intercept. So the y-intercept is going to be where the line intersects or crosses the y-axis. You get an ordered pair from the y-intercept, and that ordered pair, the x is always 0, and the y is some constant or some number. So how do we start with a line and use that information to create an equation? Let's pick up with exercise number 1. So, given a line, we want to be able to write the equation that represents it. Which form of a linear equation do you think will be most valuable for this task? Standard form, ax plus by equals c, or y-intercept, slope-intercept form. Hopefully you said slope-intercept form because you can easily identify the slope and the y-intercept from both the equation and the graph. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to start in those orders. First, we're going to identify the y-intercept. What is the y-intercept of this line? Yeah, this line crosses the y-axis. This line crosses the y-axis at 0, x of 0, y of 2. All right, now we're going to identify 2 points on this line to calculate slope. We are going to use one of our points as our y-intercept, so let's go ahead and plot that point on the line. Let's identify another ordered pair to use. So I'm going to zoom in. You want to make sure when you're picking these ordered pairs, you pick an ordered pair that crosses at 2 whole numbers. So I'm going to pick -1 and 1. Plot my next point there. All right, so I have identified my 2 points. So we can use the calculation method of slope, or you can use rise over run for purposes of modeling. Okay, I'm going to use rise over run. So to get from this point to the next, I need to rise 1, 2, 3. Sorry, you can't see me writing on the right. I need to rise 1, 2, 3. And I need to run 1 to the right. Okay. I didn't mention this. You need to make sure you're looking at your axes, your intervals. My intervals are moving by one, so I know every time I move up one, that is 1 unit, and every time I move to the right one, that is 1 unit. All right, so slope is going to be the whole number 3 or the fraction 3 over 1. Now, how can I use this information to create my equation for my line? Well, I know that in slope intercept form, y equals is standard. I know that m represents my slope, so I'm going to substitute the variable m with the number 3. I'm going to attach an x to it because x is in the equation, and then my plus b. I know that b represents my slope intercept, so the equation that represents this line must be y equals 3x plus 2. Pretty simple. Now let's use the properties of equality to change the equation from slope-intercept form. So we want to go from this form to this form. Once we do this, okay, the number attached to x is going to represent a, the number attached to y is going to represent b, and the number on the right side of the equal sign is going to represent c. We're going to make sure that we make a non-negative. So the first thing we need to do is to begin to move some things from the right side of the equation to the left side of the equation. So I'm going to start by writing it down. Y equals 3x plus 2. And I want to move my x term first. So I'm actually going to subtract 3x from the right. And I'm going to subtract 3x from the left. Notice when I'm subtracting 3x from the left, I'm not putting it directly under the y because they are not like terms. And I'll draw my little divider down the middle so you can see me keeping track of my work. Cool, so 3x minus 3x cancels out, and I'm left with just 2 on the right. Now my left side says a negative 3x plus y. Starting to look like standard form, but I'm remembering it says a cannot be negative. What could I do to a negative number to turn it positive? I could multiply that number by negative 1. Well, the thing about equations is what you do to one term, you must do to all terms. What you do to the left side, you must do to the right side. So if I want to multiply my x term by negative 1 to turn it positive, I'm also multiplying my right side by negative 1 to turn it positive. So I carry out that math, and that's literally just going to mean take the opposite of each term. So negative 3x becomes positive 3x. Positive y becomes negative y equal to positive 2 becomes negative 2. So the slope-intercept form of that equation is y equals 3x plus 2. And the standard form of this equation is 3x minus y equals 2. Great. You try example number 2. Write the equation that represents the line shown. What's the first thing you want to find? Yeah, the first thing you want to find is your y-intercept. What's the y-intercept? Y-intercept is 0, negative 1. Cool. Then the next thing we want to find is our slope. So we need to identify how many points on the line to calculate slope. We need to identify 2 points on the line to calculate slope. We've already identified 1. That's our y-intercept. Type the ordered pair that you picked in the box. All right, the other ordered pair I picked is negative 3, positive 1. What is the slope of this equation? Well, I noticed this time to get from one point to the next, I don't go up. I actually go down 1, 2. Now, remember from previous lessons, if I'm going down, numerator is going to be negative. So I'm going down 2, and I'm moving to the right 1, 2, 3. So the slope looks like the fraction negative 2 over 3. Now that I have my y-intercept and my slope, I am ready to write the equation that represents this line. Write the equation that represents this line. Notice in slope-intercept form, my plus b is now -1. That's because my line intersected my graph, intersected my y-axis at a negative ordered pair. Now let's use some properties of equality to change the equation from slope-intercept form back into standard form. Remember that last step is that a can't be negative. So I'm going to start by writing the equation down as given. So y equals -2/3 x minus 1. And the first thing we need to do is to get rid of this fraction. So if I have the fraction -2/3 x, I have the fraction -2/3. I could multiply the fraction 2/3 by the whole number 3. And when you multiply straight across, you're going to get 6/3, which reduces to 3. A quick trick to that fact is 3 and 3 are going to cancel out. I'm sorry, I did my math wrong. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 3 and 3 cancel out. And you are just left with 2. So we're going to do that in this problem. We want to turn this fraction into a whole number so it's easier to work with. So we're going to multiply our left side by 3. And we're going to multiply our right side by 3. Notice I put parentheses around my left and my right side. I use that grouping so you'll know that everything inside that parenthesis is now going to be given the 3. So on my left, I have 3y. What does my right side look like? Remember, our fraction will go away. Yeah, my left side is going to look like a -2x minus 3. I'm a few steps away from having my equation in standard form. I want to move my x term. What property of equality do I use to move my x term? I'm going to use addition property of equality. So I'm going to add 2x to both sides. -2x plus 2x cancels out. On the right, I'm left with just -3, -3. On the right now, I have 2x plus 3y. I now have my equation in standard form, and a is not negative. Go to equation number 3. Write the equation that represents the line shown. Use properties of equality to change the equation from slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, to standard form, ax plus by equals c. Remember, a cannot be negative. I want to get rid of this fraction, so I'm going to look at my denominator. That's how I choose the whole number that I'm going to multiply my left side by and my right side by. When I multiply 5y on my left side, I get 5y. When I multiply 5 times y, I get 5y. When I multiply -1/5 by 5, I'm left with a -1x. And when I multiply -4 by 5, I'm left with a -20. Remember, each term gets that 5. What property of equality do I need to use to move what term? I'm going to use the addition property of equality to move this x term. So I'm going to add 1x to both the left and the right. Left with -20 is equal to 1x plus 5y. All right, let's move on to number 4. Write the equation that represents the line shown. Well, I'm going to find my y-intercept. I notice that my y-intercept is at the origin. It's going across the y-axis at 0 and 0. Then I want to find my slope. So I need to identify 2 points on the line. I've identified 2 points on the line. And my slope is going to be rise 2 over run 2. Simplify slope. Slope is 1. So I want to write y equals 1x plus 0. So mathematically, remember we don't need to place a 1 in front of our x, and we don't need to add 0 to anything. So let's simplify this equation. Our equation is slope-intercept form is y equals x. Remember, math is a language. You read it from left to right. That means whatever y is, x equals. Examine some points on the line. I see that when x is 4, y is 4. I see that when x is negative 2, y is negative 2. Okay, so our equation does in fact match our graph. How do I take y equals x and transform it using properties of equality into standard form? So I'm going to write the equation down as given. All right, and I know that I don't want this x on the right. I actually want my x on the left, so I'm going to subtract the x from both sides. All right, now on my right side, those cancel out. I'm left with absolutely nothing. I'm left with 0. On my right, though, on my right, I'm left with absolutely 0. On my left, though, I'm left with negative x plus y. So you think you're done, but remember, our prompt doesn't want a to be negative. So I want to multiply both left and right by what number? Negative 1 is going to turn all terms positive. Multiply left by negative 1, right by negative 1. I'm going to take the opposite of each side. And I get that the standard form of this equation is x minus y equals 0. All right, 5 and 6 work exactly the same. Please make sure that you're following all of the steps. Identify your y-intercept. Use that point and find another point on the line to calculate slope or find slope. Use those two pieces of information or write your equation that represents the line. And then use properties of equality to change the equation from slope-intercept form to standard form. Remember, don't leave your A negative. If you need any help, raise your hand. Otherwise, type your answers for 5 and 6 in the box and push into your problem set.